I want to give a thank you to all of our panelists throughout the series and to Landmark's own Kelly Rance-Bruno and Sean Perry, who have put the production together. And a huge, huge shout out to our friends at Transition Town. We say this is a joint venture. There's no matching the passion that the Transition Town Port Washington folks have for this topic, and the intelligence and breadth of approach that they've brought to this have been enlightening for all of us. Special thanks to Hilda Palsdottir, Claire Brazel, and Margaret Galbraith, who really were the heart and soul in putting all of these productions together. We will be sharing them on our Landmark YouTube channel after the event, and there will be opportunities through Transition Town Port Washington's website to get more information. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Margaret. Thank you, Margaret.
All right. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to join us tonight. You are in for a truly special treat with our fantastic guests, Midge Iorio from Bedford 2030 and Walter Meyer from LOLA, Local Office Landscape and Urban Design. But before we get started, I want to thank our amazing partners, Landmark on Main Street. Laura Mogul, thank you so much for trusting us with this 5-part series. And Kelly Rance-Bruno, it has really been wonderful partnering with you and collaborating with you throughout this project. So thank you. I also want to recognize our elected officials that have been here many times throughout this series. I just really want to thank you for taking the time to listen and learn, and we look forward to working with you on these important issues. And finally, I want to thank my partners at Transition Town Port Washington. We are a group of like-minded residents, friends, and neighbors who are committed to transitioning our town off of fossil fuels and helping our earth regenerate. We are working together to build a truly sustainable and resilient community. So back in March, we began the series discussing the moral imperative to change course, to put right our relationship with this earth, to dramatically reduce our carbon emissions, and to act now to stop the worst effects of climate change. We must do this to safeguard our futures, our children's futures, and really, quite frankly, all the living beings on this beautiful earth of ours. We cannot wait. We must act within the next 8 years to cut emissions by half to have a chance to prevent the worst effects of climate change. Many of the climate effects we are feeling now, the terrible floods, the heat waves, and the severe storms, are because of carbon emissions that were emitted 20 years ago. There's a delay of effects. So you can imagine what is still yet to come from all the carbon emissions we have emitted since then. The UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change issued the science-based report that we must achieve global net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2040 to prevent overshoot beyond 1.5 centigrade of global warming. So right now we are at 1.0 centigrade, so that gives you some idea. We are in danger of multiple irreversible environmental tipping points if we fail. So thankfully, through lots of hard work and activism, our leaders are starting to act. And at the last, at our last series, at our last event, we talked about the Community Leadership and Climate Protection Act that was passed in New York State in 2019, which mandates 70% of renewable energy by 2030 and 100% zero emissions electricity by 2040. So at least in the state of New York, it is the law that we must change course and cut emissions. And excitingly, just this past week, President Biden announced that the United States will cut its carbon emissions by over 50% by 2030. So while this is fantastic that our national and state leaders are finally acting, for these efforts to be successful, I believe it requires individual and communities to work together to cut our carbon emissions, to switch to renewable energy, to electrify our homes, our businesses, and to plant trees and forests. To meet these goals requires community-wide change here and across the country and the globe. And while this may seem daunting, it is doable. And luckily tonight we have two amazing guests who are leaders and pioneers in building resiliency and creating sustainable and resilient communities. So without further ado, I will introduce our first guest, Midge Iorio. Midge Rorio is the Executive Director of Bedford 2030. Under Midge's leadership, the town of Bedford achieved a 44% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions and exceeded its 2020 climate action goal. They held New York State's first fuel-efficient car EV show, and recently they adopted a 2030 climate action plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 80% by 2030 and 100% by 2040. Welcome, Midge. We are so happy that we have you here with us tonight.
Well, thank you so much, Margaret and Laura and everyone in your community. And it's so fantastic that your elected officials are here. And I just want to thank you for the work you're doing. This series sounds amazing. I'm really honored to be here to really, have a conversation about, strategies about how we can bring a community together around shared climate actions, around a goal, and to drive real change and impact. So I'm going to now share my screen. Okay, so building on some of the comments that Margaret, just made about the urgency of the situation. A lot of times when I speak with our community, we start with, why organize a community to take action? And the answer is that boots on the ground action is essential. Every day we are confronted with the threats of climate change and global warming, from frequent wildfires to health issues related to poor air quality that impact all of us and impact our children, flooding, sea level rise, species facing extinction. It's daunting. These issues are global and they are local. They are impacting our communities on an economic, a health, a social justice, and a lifestyle level. And our community, as the boots on the ground, passionate climate activists, our challenge and our opportunity as a community is to really know that we can make a big difference. And a lot of the solutions to do that already exist. So I'm going to just give you a little bit of background of, who we are, how we came about, and what we've done. And I'm eager to hear any questions that you have. So kind of like you guys, Bedford 2030 really came about because a group of concerned citizens and one of our elected officials, literally sitting around a kitchen table, decided way back in 2009 that they had to do something. We had to do something on a local level about climate change. They hosted an environmental summit, and actually 1,000 people came. And so clearly this was an issue that was important in our community. And the group grew. They wrote what was, I think at the time, the first climate action plan in all of Westchester, set an aggressive goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, or what at the time was an aggressive goal, 20% by 2020. And they had the foresight to know that plan would just sit on a shelf unless there was a means to actually bring the community, to create a community of advocates. And so Bedford 2030 was created to lead a grassroots movement in the community to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and protect natural resources. Oh, I think in advance. Uh-oh. That's so weird. Oh, there we go. Okay. So for the past 10 years, 11 years, actually, we've been partnering with the entire community, with residents, with town leaders, with schools, with houses of worship, with businesses, with local organizations, with other organizations with like-minded missions to come together and to tackle this goal. So that's really what we've been doing for 10 years, is engaging the entire community. So how do we structure ourselves to meet this goal of 20% by 2020? We broke out task forces in each of the areas of our climate action plan: energy, food, waste, transportation, water, and land. And we went out into the community and we found experts, maybe retired experts. The head of our waste recycling group was a retired solid waste engineer. And we found passionate community members and brought them together to come up with solutions and drive action around those areas. The other thing that we did was we went out and we went to all of our key business sectors, schools, houses of worship, businesses, and brought in volunteers to get involved with our mission. Probably one of the most critical and essential parts of our organization has been the public partnership between Bedford 2030 and our town government. We partner with the town and to promote and share accountability for our climate action goals and to bring forth solutions. Our town models the behavior change that we're asking our community to take. They've assessed all their buildings, they're electrifying the buildings, transitioning the fleet to EVs, so the town is a model. Bedford 2030 adds capacity to bring education, programs, forums to the community that the town itself could not provide. As an independent non-government entity, Bedford 2030 has flexibility and agility and can accomplish things outside sometimes some of the constraints of government. And together, this public-private partnership has really brought together, pride in what we're doing and in the leadership that we're taking in our community. So what's our recipe? What are our strategies to engage our community and to change behavior? So, one is empowerment, is to really provide the information and education that sparks a light with someone and makes someone move to the next step. Another thing is to meet people where we are. While we would like everyone to buy an EV and a heat pump, that's not where everybody can start. And so we like to bring people in and engage them, where they have a passion, where they have an area of interest, and where they can do something where there's it's not that big of a lift and there's a high likelihood of success, like a community compost program. Bedford 2030, one of the main things that we do is to provide tools and resources to take action. So that's anything from an educational forum to a program like community compost to workshops. So we try to connect people with tools and resources. And then really one of the most challenging and important things is to make it relevant. How do you make this sort of nebulous concept of reducing greenhouse gas emissions personally relevant? And, especially lately, we've really been working hard to really talk more about, the impact of greenhouse gas emissions and personal health and air quality and our precious land and water resources, to really bring home, why we're doing what we're doing. So now I'm going to just kind of go through a few of our action areas and a few of the programs and campaigns that we've done that we really think have been particularly impactful in what we've done over the past few years. I don't know why I'm having trouble advancing I apologize. Okay, so I'm going to start with renewable energy. I found a new way to advance. So first of all, I don't know, I hope community choice aggregation, that's an aggregated buy of energy that a town or a group of towns can do. And it's actually celebrating its 5-year birthday. Tomorrow is the 5-year birthday of CCA. If anyone wants to come, I can send you a link. But one of the most important things that we did was we band together with 14 other municipalities and chose 100% renewable electric supply through Sustainable Westchester's Westchester Power Program. And so in one fell swoop, I think 70,000 customers switched to renewable energy.
That's amazing.
So, and one thing I will mention is when we think about programs and campaigns, we think about trying to have a balance between individual action, something that, you know, a person or a family could do, and collective action, something like CCA that drives really strong impact. So that was really terrific, and all of our residents and small businesses were opted in. That program has started in Westchester. In Westchester, it's grown over the past 5 years and is now throughout, you know, in communities throughout the state. Another, just I'll mention, a good energy point of entry is community solar. That's a really great way to get people, you know, it's easy to sign up, you save money. And what's really great is you can actually participate in a CCA program and do community solar at the same time. So you can have a double impact. So moving on to buildings, high performance buildings, we've, you know, once you've got 100% renewable electric supply, then you need to electrify. You need to be efficient and electrify. And one of the main things we've done since day one, our first program was Energize Bedford, which was a program to support community members in making energy efficiency upgrades. And we, you know, we continue to stress energy efficiency. And then over the past few years, we've also done a lot of education around heat pumps and electrifying your heating and cooling. We did a Heat Smart campaign, and, you know, for both of those, many times we find from community members that there's like sort of an, you know, oh my God, what do I do in my home? It's complicated, it's expensive, it's overwhelming. So some of the resources that we provide to make that helpful is we're actually just about to start with an energy coach who can actually sit with somebody and go through their situation in their home. Sustainable Westchester and NYSERDA have vetted contractor lists that we share, information about incentives, and probably the most effective thing that we do is we have a core of ambassadors, community members who have already embraced these solutions, gone through the program, that we can pair somebody with, so you can talk to a neighbor about, you know, about something, you know, which is always more inspiring and you know, than talking to me. I just want to mention Meatless Monday because it was a great gateway program. The goal was to engage the community and help everybody understand the impact between food choice and climate change. And that was a great program. We brought in, I think, like 300 households, and was really doable. And we were able to measure, you know, what our carbon impact was from that program. And we also were able to stay in touch with those community members and involve them in our organization or in action areas in other ways. For electric vehicles, similar to buildings, we have resources. It's always, you know, daunting to find who are the local dealers who actually sell these cars. So resources to help people, you know, when it's time to make the change, know who are the dealers, you know, get over range anxiety. We also last year and this year, we'll do this again, is do an EV parade and an owner showcase event. And one of the things we've been doing lately that's really helpful is we've just taken the time, and it's not easy, but we've gone out there and we've forged relationships with our local dealerships. This summer, we're actually once a month going to, at different places in the community, have an EV of the month that's on display. We'll promote it. You know, people can come and see that it's nice looking, real. We'll provide information. And then also promoting alternative forms of transportation. And then another great gateway program is climate-friendly yard practices. Last year, we did a pollinator-friendly garden tour that was incredibly popular. We did a series called Dig In once a week during COVID all summer, and we had, 50, 60 people attending every week to find out what to do in their garden. And in a minute, I'm going to talk to you about a new program we're doing called the Bedford Drawdown Initiative. So that's a smattering of some of our programs and some of the things that have worked. And just in terms of, again, how do we go about bringing a community together and creating a culture of sustainability and behavior change. And one thing is really ongoing, consistent communication and celebrating the successes that we share together. And here's a picture of something we do from time to time. At a town board meeting, we invite community members to come in who've made an energy efficiency upgrade or converted to a heat pump, and we do a recognition event and give out certificates, and the local media comes, and it's just a great way to, celebrate what we're doing and to, reinforce what we're all trying to accomplish together. And again, here, this is a great example of neighbor to neighbor ambassadors. These early adopters are the people who, talk to the next round of people, and all of a sudden it becomes, oh yeah, it's not that complicated, and wow, you saved money. The other thing is measure and report. With a mission that's literally a specific goal, we measure that, but everything we do, we try to, we can't know it, not always as scientific as measuring greenhouse gas emissions, but how many people participate in a program, how many heat pumps installed, how many tons of food waste have we diverted. So we every year send out a progress report, and we try to share that information, far and wide as an inspiring way to commit to climate action now. So as you guys know, we did do a progress report in 2019, and we did learn that we exceeded our 2020 goal, but with, and we used to say we wanted to go out of business once we achieved that goal, but with quite a bit more work still to be done, we did write a new 2030 climate action plan, rebranded our movement as Bedford 2030 Climate Action Now, and we and our community, we hope, are committed to 10 more years of action. And I'm just in the last couple of minutes, I want to share what we're focusing on now. So, as you know, our goal is 80% reduction by 2030, and that actually is reducing emissions by 75,700 metric tons. So, how are we going to do that? And from our greenhouse gas inventory, we know where we need to spend our time. We know that in Bedford, 48% of our emissions from Bedford is in our transportation, and 50% is in our buildings. So that's really where we're focusing. As I just explained, we cast a pretty wide net over the first 10 years, and that's not to say we're not going to do all of those action areas, but this is where we're spending our time and our effort, and it's where we have to. And in terms of buildings, we are making efforts to measure our existing building stock. We're working with some of our oil companies to get some community-based data that we'd like to use to help community members actually calibrate their own household emissions. We've recently passed the New York State Stretch Energy Code, which has stricter guidelines for new and existing building upgrades in terms of energy efficiency. We're going to push even harder on efficiency upgrades, electrification, and all of that. Our municipal buildings have all recently had energy assessments, and 2 of them right now are undergoing upgrades, and both of those buildings include the installation of a heat pump. Our police station recently installed a solar array when it was redone. So municipal buildings are walking the walk and modeling, and another big focus is on our commercial buildings. In terms of transportation, we're also working on a really exciting new project to measure our townwide transportation, with community-based data. and a tool that will actually allow community members to, go into the tool and put, find their VIN, what their impact is, and to get solutions, on an electric vehicle standpoint that is a good alternative when it's time to make the switch. Our municipal fleet is continuing to upgrade. We'd like it to be faster, and especially some of the heavy duty vehicles, but it's something that we're talking to the town about. And we have started conversations with our community in the transition to zero emission buses. And then, so those are two of our three pillars. And then our third pillar is a new action area called the Bedford Drawdown Initiative. And our goal here is to measurably increase greenhouse gas drawdown through natural resources in alignment with our climate action plan, and to really pilot and model how a community can draw down greenhouse gases naturally. And the first project that we're almost done with as part of this initiative is through GIS mapping. We are creating a natural resource inventory of our community. And, for example, we know now that 66% of Bedford is forested, and we know that 10% is hardscape, and we know that 10% is lawns. So lawns is a big opportunity area. And we're going to use that inventory. We're researching now how to, exactly how to do this, but to establish, a baseline inventory. So, what carbon emissions are being sequestered right now in the town of Bedford, and then to determine what's our potential for carbon capture and to set a goal. And the other thing that we're going to do is engage the community in this program, through some pilot programs. So some of the things we're working on now is something called carbon farming, and that's the idea of recruiting community members as citizen scientists in their backyard to test their soil and to convert some of their lawn to, deep-rooted plants that are better for soil. So both the soil and the plants will capture carbon. We have a big tree planting initiative coming up this fall, and tree planting is something we'll probably do a lot of over the next 10 years. And then another thing that's probably not for this year, but we actually would like to get a town herd of goats who can go from, and other towns have done this, who can go from property to property, working on the invasive species that are, bringing down the trees that are capturing carbon, and also having goats graze on land is great for the soil. So
Midge, I have a quick question. All of this depends on connecting with residents. And how do you do that? One of the viewers wants to know, how do you do that? How do they come to your website? How do you get people involved in doing all these fantastic projects?
So, a couple of different ways, but I would say that, word of mouth. We do a lot of presentations in the community, friends bringing in friends, sort of the meet people where they are and bring them along idea. Once somebody does a program with us, there's opportunities to volunteer at our take it or leave it shed, or, get involved in a task force. We do a lot of, we're in the local paper almost every week. Sometimes we call it the Bedford 2030 record review.
Great.
And we've grown our email list. We have about 3,500 people on our email list. So but we've been at this for 10 years. Mm-hmm. So, and what I will say is that, when we started, this was an issue that was sort of brand new, and, we had to really kind of explain it to everybody, and, it was just very new. Now, you guys, everybody cares, or not everybody, but lots of people care about this. And, I think I'm so impressed. I think there's a lot of people on this Zoom. So you guys are, and we did things like what you're doing, hosting, a series like this. And then the hard work is then staying in touch.
All right.
And I just would also add that, we've done a lot over the past 11 years, but, we've we didn't do it all at once. And in the beginning, we stayed very focused on a few priorities. And as you heard, now, once again, we want to stay very focused on a small number of priorities. So I'm really done. My last slide. Oh, did I lose my last slide? Oh, whoa. Oh, I don't know what happened there.
So I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Go ahead with your last slide.
Well, I'm gonna just do that. Yeah. Okay. So, well, my last slide is just, what the other thing we're doing now is what you're doing is deep community engagement. We want to create an army of climate activists. We want to re-engage our movement, and we're hoping that you guys are going to learn something, out of the box that you're going to share with us. I know this is going to happen. That's going to, help us, because this is the fun part, but it's the hard work, and not, it's never easy, but it's so rewarding. So that's my presentation.
This is fantastic. Thank you. I have a couple quick questions I wanted to follow up with. What would you say are the economic reasons to make these changes now?
Well, I mean, certainly energy efficiency, that will save you money by, sealing the envelope and stop energy from wasting out of your home. Community solar is, that's a guaranteed savings. Community choice aggregation is a fixed price. And I think over the course of the 5 years that Bedford's been in that program, that it's actually been a break even. And so that's 100% renewable energy, which is actually usually a premium. We've actually gotten at parity to utility. So I know, those are great economic reasons. Right. And, and for our community itself to be embracing some of these solutions, if we can do these climate solutions that bring on resiliency as well, that our towns, I know in Bedford over the past many years, we've lost tons of trees and spent a fortune on storm cleanup. And so there's, and then other big economic benefit, or even
is, what are your benefits in general? It doesn't even have to be economic.
I just want to add, just in terms of, if people are installing heat pumps and making, getting energy efficiency upgrades and even buying EVs. And I know not everybody can invest in all of that right away, but that's economic activity. And, those contractors that are doing that work, they might not be right from Bedford, but they're from Westchester. So that's another good thing. A community building, coming in, like anything in life, coming together and tackling a challenging problem, is really strong community building, and, sharing a goal and working on it together. From a lifestyle standpoint, if we can reduce emissions, we can improve the quality of our air. We can, make sure that the beautiful preserves that we walk in, stay the way they are. Another thing we're actually just experimenting with is we put some air quality monitors in our community to compare our air to Westchester County air, and to see, if there's any interesting learning there.
That's great. I'm going to ask just one more question until we move on, and then we can come back to more questions at the end of the program. But do you keep a database of environmental measures, emissions, house by house, like a public database?
So that would be so awesome. So we don't. We are trying, as I mentioned, to get some very community-based data on our oil usage and on our transportation, and we're getting really close. I don't know that we would be able, and we can track the people who we connect with, but we do not have a database that deep.
Okay.
But maybe one day.
That sounds good. So we can return to more questions with you at the end of the program. I just wanted to say in your chart that I noticed that the largest emissions was buildings, and our buildings in the United States account for 30% of greenhouse gases, which is more, and I guess in some communities more, and that is more than the entire transportation industry. So I would like to introduce our next guest, Walter Meyer, to talk about how we can transform our built-in infrastructure and plan for resiliency. Walter Rodriguez Meyer is a landscape and urban designer. educator, and community organizer for climate justice. He is the co-founder of Local Office Landscape and Urban Design based in Brooklyn, New York. The firm has garnered accolades from across the disciplines of architecture, landscape architecture, public policy, science, and art. Walter teaches at Parsons, the New School for Design, and holds a BLA from the University of Florida and an MLAud at Harvard Graduate School of Design. Walter is also the executive director of the nonprofit Coastal Marine Resource Center, and President Obama named Walter a White House champion for change. And I could keep on going, but I'm going to let Walter tell you about his incredible projects. Welcome, Walter. We're so glad to have you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for making time tonight. That was a really important presentation from Midge. Thank you, Midge, for setting the framework. I'm going to dive a little deeper on how a neighborhood can be designed for it to be climate resilient. Apologize, I'm on toddler duty as I'm speaking. I'm going to take us, we're going to explore the Caribbean, we're going to explore New York, and we're going to talk about resiliency and sustainability. So one of the first projects that our firm LOLA was founded in 2006. Excuse me, I want to make sure that the sharing is active. So share. Okay. Margaret, give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen.
Yes, I can.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Is there a way to make it any bigger? There
yeah,
we go.
I'm
Perfect.
going to minimize this one.
All right. So this is in Puerto Rico?
Yeah, so our first slide is in the west coast of Puerto Rico. So this is West Puerto Rico. This is the west coast of Puerto Rico, third largest city. In 2006, we worked with the governor of Puerto Rico and a local consulting team to redesign the entire coast of the city. And it was one of the few instances in the United States where an entire city's watershed was converted from a post-industrial landscape to one that is nature-based. And so one of the things that we found as we came to the site was a condition where there were storm pipes leaching stormwater onto the beach and into the bay. And Mayaguez Bay was struggling with red tide, and a lot of the things that happened in Long Island Sound, as well as the South Shore, were parallel here. And what was important is some of the things that we did in Puerto Rico in 2006 at the time were illegal to do in New York. There are loopholes that we're able to identify and policies we're able to change to allow us to do this approach in New York City. But essentially we took lessons from adjacent untouched creeks near the city and reinserted a nature's check valve, which is essentially a dune system between the river and the ocean, which polishes a lot of that runoff that naturally occurs in a forest, but is toxic for a reef. And how it's toxic is it takes away the oxygen out of the water and creates fish kill, and algae covers the corals, and the corals can't grow. Very similar problems in Long Island Sound and the Great South Bay. And so in the bottom slide on the left is how we took these systems and wove it into the urban fabric, but also acknowledged the pressures of real estate and the economics of city making while introducing parts of the system that would have been there 200 years ago. So it's kind of a forensic ecology, studying how the city existed 200 years ago as a hydrological system, and how that can inform how the city's future can be rearranged for both sustainability and resiliency. Okay. And the project had, it was certainly a post-industrial landscape that took old tuna canning factories and it converted them into new wetlands and dunes and a coastal forest. It rearranged a coastal road, and it also influenced adjacent properties. So there's a relationship between the private property, between the coast and nature, and in the middle, the infrastructure of the city. When they're all coordinated, it leads to a larger benefit, and sustainability and resiliency can be achieved with a little less public dollar when the public and private are pulling the same direction in alignment with nature. The project was 2 kilometers long, $55 million budget, and it allowed us over a few years to convert an entire coast that was able to protect this coast from Hurricane Maria and subsequent earthquakes. The project had to be designed for tsunamis. So we had these extra large wetlands that were designed for tsunamis that would store a tsunami impact and reduce flooding after a tsunami. We had to work with the Caribbean Tsunami Institute to pull this off. And because the wetlands were sized so large, they were able to treat more stormwater than we normally would have. So these wetlands you can see here on the photo on the right were taken 3 years after the growing period was finished. And it allowed us to polish high volume of water, what's called the first flush. The first 20 minutes of city water that would normally go in the bay is redirected in the wetlands, and all the pollution, which 90% of that pollution comes in the first half hour of a rain event. And we're able to keep that into the wetland and not let it percolate. And if you pay attention to the color of the water in this photograph, it gets cleaner with each layer as it approaches the ocean. And then finally polishing through the dune system, much like a sand polishing bed like you would see in a sewage treatment system. And the water quality was vastly improved after construction was complete. Notice the slide on the left. This is pre-construction, where the bay had particulates. And this is a normal dry day without a lot of rainwater. And now on the slide on the right, we have the same dry condition, no rain, but you can see the bay bottom. And then that's really important detail that the water clarity improves. How we pulled that off is it's not just having wetlands, but what was in them. We had oysters, we had black mangroves and saltgrass. We had all kinds of layers of species in the benthic environment, meaning the underwater environment, and the littoral environment above. Now note that pipe that we showed at the beginning slide that was on the beach leaching all the pollution. We trimmed that pipe upstream, and you can see it here on the right corner. And that pipe now leaches solids into this chamber, which is food for oysters and food for mangroves. And then it makes its way through the wetland and is completely polished to stormwater, gray water standards, so that it can make its way through the sand dune. And in the end, there's no nutrients left that get into the ocean. So all the nutrients stay where they belong as fertilizer for this wetland. Now, the issue of resiliency is a different layer than sustainability. Sustainability concerns itself with water quality. Resiliency concerns with how can nature protect people in the city and economic holdings. And we've designed the project so that it had multiple layers of defense against hurricanes. Now, this was one of the first projects to be built in the United States that was designed for resiliency, not sustainability. It had sustainable elements, but it's primarily designed to protect this city against sea surge and tsunamis. And so one of the things that you notice in this slide, this is after Hurricane Maria impacted the site in 2017, is that we interviewed the businesses adjacent to this project. And they told us their lived experience, kind of ethnographic interviews where they told us that the urban flotsam, that is the debris from the hurricane, stayed in the coastal forest and did not move into the city. But the surge went through the forest and stayed within the park and did not pass the street. So it's important to talk about that multi-layered approach. And we learned from the businesses that they were able to open the next business day, despite some of the heaviest rain ever measured. After the hurricane left, the mountains flooded and streets became rivers. And they thought the hurricane was over, and then the mountains turned on and just drained everything. And these wetlands, because they were oversized for a tsunami, they were able to absorb this, what was a generational rain. And we didn't model for that, we didn't design for that, but because we designed for such a large event as a tsunami, we had the happy mistake of being able to hold this rain event. And the metrics aren't perfect, but we've shared this report as a metrics of imperfection, which is, it wasn't 100% resilient, it was about 91% resilient, in that the coastal forest was 91% intact. We lost about 9% of it. The drainage system stayed and maintained its positive drainage throughout the storm. And the debris, as you see, was kept in the rack line. And 2 weeks later, the park was able to reopen with a festival with a municipal budget. So they didn't need a federal budget to open this project. It was just a team of a dozen municipal employees recovering the park. That project started to shape some of our position in the federal government to advise, starting with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus in 2009. Our firm, although we did that project in Puerto Rico, is New York based. We're in Brooklyn. And a congresswoman from our district, Nydia Velasquez, brought our firm to the Congress to present what she called the Mayaguez model and show how resiliency can start to shape policy. And we need design-led policy making in order to, unencumber design thinking, because I was getting a lot of places that were illegal to do these approaches because you're in the ecosystem, even though we're restoring it. So we want to show that you can have ecosystem services. And the most important thing out of that work culminated in this white paper from the White House. I was an advisor and author to the Obama administration on resiliency topics. And you can find, a lot of the documents there in the White House Obama page, look up my name. But this document is really important because this is about economics. This says that the benefit cost analysis of hard infrastructure is a well-trodden path going back to the 1800s. A seawall can be justified economically, but we need to now turn to economic instruments and look at some of the ecosystem services. What can nature do for us, and what is the ROI on that? And this was mandating that as a default operation and not an outlier. I'm going to switch slides really quick to, now we jump to New York. So we're leaving the Caribbean. And this is a project in Rockaway Beach. This is in Queens. This is at the edge of Nassau County, meeting New York City. Our firm delivered for the city of Long Beach, the next island over on the right, the comprehensive plan a few years back. And in Rockaway, we're doing the New York City's first net zero neighborhood. And this neighborhood is a project that is regenerative, resilient, and sustainable. And I'll dive into that now. The New York Times author Stephanos Chen wrote about this project, saying that it is at the front lines of climate change in New York. It's important to note that if we can make net zero neighborhoods work in New York City, we can really make them work anywhere. That's a great testing ground for this. This map is what I call geothermal country. It is when the last ice sheet came down, it stopped on the ridge of Long Island in Brooklyn. And that brown streak you see there is the edge of that ice sheet from Canada. And if you notice the red areas, that's areas where I call geothermal country. It's if your property is on this red zone, you need to be looking at geothermal energy and heat pumps for groundwater source as a primary source of energy, because it means that the soil is high porosity, the groundwater is elevated. And there's a lot of confusion about geothermal. Is it mean it comes from volcano or the Earth's mantle? That's a different type of geothermal. This is simply saying the groundwater below Long Island is 50 degrees, and we can heat and cool with that. And 50 degrees is warm in the winter and cool in the summer.
Can you tell people how that works with geothermal? Because I don't know if everyone knows.
Sure. So just below your property is groundwater, and if you can access it, it's quite an asset, because think in the summer, the air is 110 degrees versus the groundwater, which is 50, right? and your indoor temperature wants to be in the 60s or 70s, right? Then think about that in the winter when you need heat. That groundwater is 50 or 55 degrees. That's a great starting point instead of -10, right? So great starting point, and water transfers temperature more efficiently than air, right? So heating up air, no bueno, no good. We should do it with water. The other thing is that they last 30 years, these heat pumps, and there's no effect on the groundwater. There's a lot of misinformation that geothermal means you're taking water and affecting the groundwater and the aquifer. Those are non-issues. The permits are very easy to get because there's no impact on the groundwater. There's no exchange at all between the house and the groundwater. Right there.
And do you have a geothermal map can you get it for our area? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, well, for New York City, there's a new geothermal toolkit that the city requires that you look at first.
Okay.
And if geothermal doesn't make sense, then you can look at other options. They're flipping on its head. Historically, people would look at the conventional options, but now New York City requires you to look at this geothermal toolkit.
Okay.
I wish that toolkit existed for Nassau County. That would be incredible. So this project also learned from COVID. There's many elements of climate change, and COVID is one of them. Being outdoors is going to be a key part of our cities moving forward. Pandemics are becoming more frequent. If you pay attention to the decades of pandemics, they're going to be a result of the loss of nature, the loss of wild areas. So we need to design our cities differently in anticipation of these pandemics. Note that this project is a large area, but it's connected to a subway, and it's one of the few places where you can get off the A train or get on the A train in Times Square. The doors close, and they open an hour later on a beach view to the boardwalk. It's important to know that each of these buildings is turned inside out so that the guts of the building, the infrastructure, is able to be coupled between the sky and the rain and the groundwater below. Some of the first buildings are just being constructed. They have what's called passive house insulation. It means a really tight, thick insulation that has passive habitability. That means just your body heat heats them up. And so you hardly need any heating, right? So it's really incredible. It's like wearing a sweater all the time, right? But you're around the building. That means we need less solar panels to electrify the building. And we're able to get high density. These are 8-story buildings, and we're getting most of our energy, if not all of our energy, from the solar panels that you see here. And how do we do this? Is we have solar on the roof, we have solar in the parking lots, and the parking lots are designed for flooding. They have porous paving. Instead of spending money underground on a pipe to manage stormwater, we're doing it at the surface, and you can see it. You're spending money visually, so you can see this. And so that rain just disappears right when it hits the ground instead of putting it in a pipe. That also allows us to design for more intense rain events. Instead of a 10-year rain event, which is a normal towns in Long Island designed for, we're hitting 100-year and even 1,000-year rain events of performance with our decentralized porous paving. Now, something special about Rockaway, it's a very bohemian place. It's also a working class coast, one of the last working class coasts in the United States. Most of the coast have been gentrified. And there's already an informal arrangement where a lot of the Michelin rated restaurants in Rockaway are already leveraging the community gardens and doing community supported agriculture to bring that food to the table just blocks away by bicycle on a boardwalk, right? The Rockaway Boardwalk is New York City's first bike highway. And since that's already happening informally, what this neighborhood is creating is a social infrastructure to formalize this process and bringing in biodigesters so that we can take the waste from those restaurants, turn it to energy, turn it to fertigation, fertilizer, and sell that bottled fertilizer as a branded product. And lastly, get electricity from these biodigesters. These are some of the largest batteries being built in New York City in these buildings that are allowing us to make sure the elevators run in a blackout and make sure that able to be comfortable despite a blackout. There's a lot of senior housing happening on this project. The regenerative systems are root zones that you see here that we've designed to both manage groundwater in the swales that you see on the left of this image but also design dunes that protect this part of Rockaway from Hurricane Sandy type surge. And we took, just like Mayaguez, where we had untouched rivers and forests adjacent to the city that we learned from, here we have the sunken forest of Fire Island, which was our compass to what New York City was 200 years ago. And we're restoring these systems here in New York City. The great thing about doing that is the coastal natives are, nearly half of them are edible, which is really important in a food desert like Queens in Rockaway Beach. And the most fun part of this is most of these buildings will be timber. So they'll be carbon positive buildings, carbon neutral buildings, where not only are they getting their energy from the sun, but we're banking that carbon in the beams and columns of these buildings. And this will be, while timber buildings are starting to be built in New York City in singular pieces, this will be the first assemblage of a neighborhood happening. And this is a view of the main street where we have a restaurant rows, and we're encouraging Black-owned restaurants. This neighborhood is 67% people of color, and we like that the entrepreneurs in this neighborhood are cultivated, and the success rates are equal to the demographics that exist today.
I have a quick technical question. When you said the carbon is baked into the beams, can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so when you grow a tree in the forest, right, and that tree dies, it eventually decays and the carbon gets baked in the soil. Banked, you know, it gets stored in the soil, but over time it gets released into the atmosphere. As long as that beam and that forest product is locked into a building, that carbon is not being released and it's kind of banked into the building, right? Which is really exciting. So building with wood is actually, depending on the source and the way you do it, is one of the most sustainable and resilient things you can do. But the very best thing you can do is reuse an existing building. Why? Because all the energy embedded in construction, even in this approach, is never as good as reusing an existing building. And last piece I'll share with you is a lot of people think that there's misinformation about solar panels. You know, they can't handle the wind. And this is a project we designed in Puerto Rico, 10 stories in the air, and it survived Hurricane Maria. And most of the solar panels in Puerto Rico failed by about 33% or 31%, meaning a third of the solar panels in Puerto Rico, when hit by Hurricane Maria, collapsed and the whole system failed. This is one of the first systems we designed so that every solar panel can work without having the one next to it. So it's a decentralized system where the strings can operate independently. So we only lost about 8% of these solar panels. And if you look, these are some of the damage from Maria. Only 2% were lost from wind, and the other 6% were from projectiles. And it's important to note that the system stayed active, and we're able to keep the supermarket that service tens of thousands of people on the ground floor energized with this system. And it's important that resiliency story is told in addition to the sustainability story, because this is not just about survival and normalization after a storm, but it's about business continuity as well. And the last thing I'll share with you, I'm also director of Coastal Marine Resource Center, and we have a project in Puerto Rico. It's called Solar Libre, where we're taking donated solar materials from the solar companies that I work with, the CEOs, on these neighborhood scale projects professionally. And the nonprofit piggybacks on my for-profit firm. And we're sending materials down there, working with nonprofits on the ground, as well as our own recruits, and teaching them how to do solar, and each one teach one how to do solar. So we're teaching teachers and getting help from the arts community. In this case, Ai Weiwei came down and asked how he can help. We put him to work on the roof of a woman-owned bakery to feed hundreds of people within walking distance. This is a New York Giants wide receiver, Victor Cruz, who came to his mother's town of Arecibo and helped us energize a community center for disabled folks. And so the program is women leadership development. So we're teaching women how to do solar, sending them materials and getting out of their way. Just empower them with resource, and they decide what community centers get energized. and they're teaching each other about solar. And now we've had our first graduating class, and we're now fundraising for our next class, which is, it costs us about $40,000 per student per year to get them certified. And they've now installed 180 community centers, are now working off-grid, free of capitalism, no utility bills. And it's an exciting moment where energy is a human right.
That's
So
awesome.
maybe with this last slide, I don't know if my audio is working, but it's.
I don't think we can hear it.
Okay. So this project is, I'm going to share sound. Okay.
Mira, no hay que prender la planta, ¿lo ves?
So what happened is about our 60th site we energized, we were in the mountains of Puerto Rico, and the hurricane was in September, and almost Christmas time, this is December, we found an orphanage where there had been neglect. The government hadn't been there to help them. They had a little bit of food and water from businesses that donated locally. They had no power, but these young children, the age of my own 6-year-old, decorated this tree and had this kind of optimism that Christmas will happen. And so it was visceral to energize this one facility. And it was really important to note where at the time when the president of the United States was throwing paper towels in San Juan, this was happening, 45 minutes away, right? And in my own country to find this kind of neglect, it really was painful. But also this is the way forward. We can decentralize this problem. So I'm going to attempt to run the video again with sound. You hear it now, Margaret?
Yes.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Energía de sol. Toda la energía de sol, el corriente. ¿Viste, Carlito? Mira, no hay que prender la planta, ¿lo ves?
That's awesome.
So that last comment was the owner of the nonprofit, and he said, the silence without the generator. He couldn't believe it. It's like, great, because they're running the generator to do this, and now they don't smell the fuel, and there's no risk to the kids, with fire at night, and now they're just, free, quiet in the mountains of Puerto Rico.
So if we all had solar panels, we wouldn't have to worry about the next hurricane as much.
Solar panels and a battery. So
Yes.
solar panels without the battery won't work in a hurricane. You got to have the batteries. That makes a solar panel by itself is sustainable, but without the battery, it is not resilient.
So in all these things you talk about we can do to existing buildings, because, there's people that tear down houses and put up new houses and buildings as well. And so I just wanted to find out everything you described. Is it possible in existing buildings as well?
Yeah, that project I showed in San Juan, we retrofitted an existing development. It was multiple city blocks, and you can fit these things anywhere. So it's possible. You have to do it in increments. But like I said, reusing existing buildings like that San Juan project, doing efficiency first, starting little. My own townhouse is here in Brooklyn. The first thing I did was change the light bulbs to LED, but a warm colored LED that's healthy for you. The color matters. And then from there went up the chain until it was time to redo the boiler broke. And I was like, okay, time to go with a high efficiency system. So I have heat pumps. You can see one behind me up there, right? Right there. And we did, when it was time to redo the insulation, we did soybean husk bio-based insulation, ripped out the walls here, spray foamed it in. It's a really amazing insulation. The second they spray foamed it, they finished at 5 p.m. and it was like -10 outside. And the indoor temperature from the guys working, it jumped to 60 degrees inside just from their body heat. It was amazing to see that same day. So my heat pumps barely work in the winter. And our heating bill went from $500 a month to $90 a month, which is incredible.
And I have a question from Lorraine. She was wondering, how do you manage air quality in such airtight buildings?
Yeah, it's really important to separately have something called the ERV. ERV is an energy recovery ventilator. What that means is each room is ventilated. They have two types. They have centralized ones that are ducted, and then they have decentralized ones that you just drill a 4-inch hole in each bedroom, and you slide this thing in, and they talk to each other, and they can move air around the house and outside without losing the heat. They just exchange air and have heat exchangers between them. So look up ERV, energy recovery ventilator. The fresh air is really important, and that's the one thing that bothers me about winter is being cooped up.
Right.
But now with ERVs, the air quality is better inside than outside. It packs in the oxygen, it polishes out any pollen, and it's pretty amazing.
I have a question for both you and Midge. What do you think the lessons or takeaways, good and bad, from the global pandemic experience that can be used in tackling climate change? For example, we are all in it together and we need to do our part, or the political divides and misinformation. This is from Jeffrey. And either one, Midge, you're invited as well. We can't hear.
Sure. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
So in the beginning of the pandemic, an amazing thing was, I think many of you saw, pictures in China a lot, but some in New York City too, of the air. And, because people weren't driving, all of a sudden there was a visual for greenhouse gas emissions and really linked it to air pollution. And you could take I have a picture that I use in a presentation, a side-by-side picture where you could actually see climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. And so that, I hope that visual sticks with people. I think that I do agree that the idea of coming together and tackling something is great. The Zoom, here we all are tonight. I'm in Bedford. I saw somebody from Cure 100 is here, Lynn Arthur, who is somewhere in the Hamptons, and all of a sudden we can connect with each other, in a very personal, community's really been redefined, and we can share these ideas and learn from what's working from each other. So I think that's an amazing outcome. I think something we've got to reverse is, there's been a big increase in waste. And so I hope that, I'm confident, but that's something that I hope we can turn around quickly, especially plastic waste. So I'll let Walter have a go at that one.
You want to add anything to that one, Walter?
Yeah, one of the topics is circularity, reusing the waste and anticipating before you buy, where's your stuff coming from. And one thing I will add in detail, I want to offer people things that they can do. Either they can do individually or their family, or organize and do as a community. But that biodigester I showed you was $250,000, right? That's $250,000. Sounds like a lot, but if you collectively organize, that system creates constantly 5 kilowatts of power. That's enough for 5 homes, or a business, right? And so if you had a restaurant, right, it offsets the power bill. But the biggest profit from that is the actual fertigation. If you have community gardens or people that love to garden and are hands-on, liquid fertilizer is like magic. These plants just jump out of the ground. So you sell that branded product, and the ROI on that, just the energy is one part, but it's the fertigation that gets you a lot. And I would love to see every church, every community center with one of those biodigesters, and having bikes bring, the leftover salad from the night from the restaurant, bring it over and grow some more and bring it back a month later, right?
One thing you told me about that neighborhood that you're designing is that it has a green network so that everyone can ride their bikes.
Yeah.
And they can get their food from the gardens. And I just thought that was fantastic.
Yeah, the open spaces are networked, and that's just how nature connects. Wherever water flows, you have life, right? And so all those parks are moving water without pipes through that whole project. It's a city without pipes. And in that open space, it's programmed in different ways, depending on what it needs. The whole thing is one big vein for water, but adjacent to that, we have ball fields, we have community gardens of various types, meaning we have community gardens that are for cultivating and teaching novices. Then we have for-profit farms, which are selling at a high rate, you know, more than any farm in the state, because they can sell and walk down the block and their profits are high. And so it's once community supported agriculture happens regionally, but here it is in urban form, just a block away. You can subscribe a whole row as a celebrity chef. You know, this would be the Uma's restaurant row, and you know that all your salad's coming from that row, and you can go see it after dinner. And so that there's a cultural layer to this that we're missing, and I want to make sure that's showing up tonight. That, you know, it's a place for the arts. That sustainability and resiliency is dealing with this such a pessimistic thing. Like it's, you know, it's a generational imperative. It's a crisis, but there's all these solutions that have emerged, and they're all off shelf. None of these things that I showed are experimental. There's a lot of brilliant people doing great things, and they're all exist off shelf. You just have to assemble them. And you know that saying about that the future is here, it's just poorly distributed. So you know, we just have to transfer that knowledge.
So I have several questions about composting programs. Midge, do you have a municipal composting program? This is from Beth Finger. And yeah, just tell us what you're doing as far as composting.
Yeah, so we in our community, we have private haulers, so we can't do a municipal composting or any kind of waste program on a municipal level, but we do have a program that's a joint program with the town in Bedford 2030, and a lot of communities in Westchester have it, which is called Community Compost. And we sell residents at cost little bins to collect their kitchen scraps, and they can drop it off at our recycling center, and the town pays the cost to have it hauled to a commercial composting facility. Where we did actually do an analysis, and it does seem crazy to have our kitchen scraps driven away, but actually there is a net positive impact from reducing that food waste from our waste stream. The other thing that we just started was we actually got a grant from New York State. We're doing a curbside compost program. So we're again with the town, we're offering community members a discount for a year if you want to have a company come and collect compost or kitchen scraps, and that's hauled much closer by, and you actually could buy back your kitchen scraps as compost material. And then the other thing that we do is try to encourage people, if they're interested, to compost in their backyard, which anyone can do. I have two. I have a thing called an earth machine that looks like Darth Vader's head, where I throw all of my kitchen scraps. And then I'm a gardener, so I also do have a compost pile that I use the soil. I've been using it a lot lately.
And then I don't actually know what this is, but it says, do either of you work with blockchains and blockchain governance? Good. Walter, can you help us?
Yeah, it's kind of like the next thing happening.
Okay.
So like, for example, all the little rooftops in Puerto Rico can now participate. It's really democratizing energy. So for example, there's this thing called a solar coin. You've heard of Bitcoin, which is this messy thing that is polluting and is terrible. But solar coin is for every megawatt that our program generates power, it creates a coin, and we can spend that coin. Well, right now the solar coin is just pennies, right? Sometimes it's less than a penny. But if ever becomes $1, all of a sudden these Puerto Ricans are wealthy, right? So it's like it's getting there. It's in its infancy, and everyone should look at solar coin. It's really amazing, and it's what is the next generation of cryptocurrency, the clean cryptocurrency. The other thing to look for, which is really exciting, is these big solar farms that you see happening on landfills, where they, turning leftover landfill into solar. The solar farm has to be oversized. In places like Florida, for example, we're doing a project with the mayor down there. And the mayor of Miami, you've probably seen him in the news. He's like Mr. Crypto Mayor. He's paying his employees with Bitcoin and that kind of thing. We're doing this massive solar project where the Florida FP&L only clips you at a certain amount of power that you can sell, 75 megawatts, let's call it. So I oversized the solar farm because you want to generate more power and always hit that clip, always be selling the maximum amount. But instead of 75, we have a 90 megawatt solar array. So there's a slippage between the DC and the AC conversion. It sounds technical. What it means is normally I have a battery where I store that extra power and sell it at night. But now there's this thing called a crypto battery. It literally is a mining machine that is way more efficient than a battery. And I can take that excess solar, and it runs the crypto mine, and it generates profit instead of the batteries, which have a round trip efficiency of 80%. Now I'm getting 100% straight into profit that's driven by solar. So it's a lot of things happening that will transform a lot of our energy space.
So I'm going to open up to live questions soon, but first I want to give a couple of announcements. I want to let you know that Transition Town Port Washington, as of today, is launching our TTPW 100 Carbon Tracker app. So we have joined Cure 100 Communities United to reduce emissions 100%, and their mission to meet global goals of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 100% by 2040 to support New York State's Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, as well as the most recent scientific consensus. And Bedford 2030 is also actually a member of Cure 100. So if you go to our website, which is transitiontownpw.org, there's a carbon tracker on a little link, and you can put in your information and they will tell you what your carbon footprint is. And the best thing is that working through the app, they will help you identify ways that you can reduce your carbon footprint by 5% each year to reach our target goal. So, and I just want to invite everyone to come and join us at Transition Town. We are working to transition our community to greater resiliency and sustainability. And our next meeting is May 14th at 12 o'clock on the lawn of the Science Museum of Long Island. So we have, we invite you all to get involved with our carbon tracker and getting it out to the community. We're going to have other carbon reduction initiatives. We have a pilot compost program at the Science Museum of Long Island. And I know there's spaces for more families if you're interested in joining. We have launched a Break Free from Plastic campaign here in Port Washington for youth and adults. And we are a member of the National Break Free from Plastics movement. We have also partnered with the Science Museum of Long Island on an ecosystem reclamation project. And we are doing advocacy work to pass important environmental legislation, including the Community and Climate Investment Act, which is super important that we pass it because it will ensure green jobs. It will put money into the hardest hit communities from climate change and from COVID, and it will fund our climate legislation here in New York City. And we're also working to get public power on Long Island. So we really support that because through public power, we can ensure that we can get 100% renewable energy. And just like in Bedford, you can plug in you can go plug in something and it will automatically be renewable. That's, that would be amazing. That would be a game changer. And then we could start electrifying. So anyways, I invite people to come and share their ideas and expertise. So thank you. And just so you know, there is a spring fair on Saturday at the Science Museum of Long Island, and they're really working hard to being zero waste as well. So we have a lot of community events. There's Rewild. There's a lot of ways people can get involved. But I want to turn it back over to our guests and open it up to questions from everyone. Do we have any live questions?
Looking forward to the live questions. I should call out my colleague, Mike Metzler, who's on here. What's up, Mike? Good to see you, bud.
Everyone's shy. I
have a question. I have a question
Yes.
for Walter. So,
Sure.
what is timber less or more expensive than other building materials? Like when you're building.
At the moment, it's expensive because of COVID and distribution problems. But it's actually once the contractors and there's a knowledge transfer and the industry is able to absorb it, then the labor issues of that are overcome, then it is probably the lowest cost form of construction that you can build with. To give you an example, most of it is the savings in labor. New York City is all about labor, right? Not about materials. You can make a building out of gold, and if you can build it in a day, you can still, it'll be feasible, right? So, so the deal is, it's like Legos. You can bring in like a whole floor slab and chunk it in, and it's up in a day. And that's what's amazing. But it's teaching, all the crane operators and the unions how to reorient around this technology. And this same thing applies to a lot of these technologies. Geothermal, for example, union jobs. Plumbers can switch to geothermal. All the pipe unions, it's all there. And that's sort of what's at core at Biden's approach is the economy is the bridge between nature and people. And that at the center of that is jobs.
We have a question from Claire. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes. Hello, Claire Brazell. Thank you, Walter. Thank you, Mitch. This has been fascinating. Just so fascinating. A question for Walter. I'm curious about the biodigester technology. If you could tell us all about that, as it seems to be maybe something that's not too hard to do in our local area and would go a long way to helping diverting our food waste from the garbage stream.
Yeah, especially, every little town in Long Island, all these picturesque towns, these Walt Whitman, scenes, there should be a biodigester in town, and there should be a solarized parking lot, right? And that's where the biodigester is. They're really simple, and you can also do them in your backyard. If you look at home-based, there's biodigesters for your house. And one of the lowest cost ones comes from Israel, and they're exporting it out. But it is simply just, think of the compost, right? You have a compost pile that Midge talked about, which I have one in my backyard that's rat proof because it's up on stilts because New York City is all about the rats. But that compost pile is an important thing to be doing, but it's slowly releasing carbon into the air. So it's not perfect. But if you put that compost pile into a bag and capture that methane, which is methane's 20 times more toxic to the atmosphere than carbon. That methane, if you were able to hold it and not let it go up in the air, you can then put either the home-based ones have a burner, so you can cook natural gas with it, with that biogas. But if you get big enough, like a community-sized one, you can start generating power with what is a propane generator. So a natural gas generator takes that biogas and burns it. So it's that simple. It is simply like the stomach in your belly, right? It's bacteria breaking down food, making energy, making heat, all that stuff. That's all there, and it's pretty amazing. It's that simple, and it's like easy to pull off. You guys can do it in a weekend after you order the system at your house. It's just like setting up a compost system. The question is what to do with the gas, right? When it's a small residential size, you might have a Bunsen burner and heat and cook with it, right? But like I said, when you scale up, it's when you really start to get community scale energy solution.
And then there's a question by Mike Minzer. Do you want to unmute?
Sure, thank you. Great presentation by Midge, great presentation by Walter. Walter, great to see you. I have a question for both of y'all, which is, when you're thinking about solar, different communities think about integrating it, depending on the structures, depending on the climate where you are, ways that it can help reduce heat island impact or manage stormwater or be paired with green infrastructure. And Midge, I was wondering is there any combinations that you've been interested in your town of integrating solar with these kinds of other projects? And Walter, if you might want to be able to speak about that. I know in the city and in Long Island, the Nature Conservancy just did a solar roadmap, which showed all the places that you could install solar on already developed properties. So you're not putting them in the woods, which makes no sense, right? Especially when you have all these parking lots and buildings. And that can also help reduce the temperature in these buildings, right? Because you're helping to block the sun during the summer. And we, of course, and I just want to say thank you, Margaret, for mentioning the campaign to reimagine the Long Island Power Authority, because public power, we have a chance to bring it to Long Island. There's 2 hearings coming up on this, and you could go to the Long Island Progressive Coalition website to see the campaign for public power, which would be a huge, huge deal. But on the smaller scale and at the village level or the town level, I'd just be curious about these projects that integrate maybe green infrastructure and solar.
So that is a dream of ours. We haven't, it's nothing, you know, it's actually, it's an idea in our climate action plan, and it's something that we'd love to do. Right now, where our utility is, you know, any kind of a large scale array is challenging unless it would be on the ground. And there's a lot of conversation in our community about, you know, is there any ground area that would be appropriate for solar? So it's over the next 10 years, yes, that's a goal.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting projects emerging. One example of that intersection that you mentioned, Michael, is agrovoltaics, so agriculture and solar. So right now there's a law that's been passed in New York City where they're requiring new construction and retrofits of a certain size. They have to have solar or a green roof or a mix. And most of the people come out reaching out to us to design for them a rooftop. And they assume that you have to have solar or green infrastructure, but you can't have both. And we said, no. What we've learned is actually the roof gardens are happier when the midday sun is not blasting them. They want morning sun, just like your good garden. If you're a gardener, you know, you want morning sun and evening sun, but that middle of the day, the plants are just trying to survive and it's too much, right? They're evapotranspirating water excessively. So yeah, agrovoltaics, solar voltaics are making these plants so they're lower maintenance and more robust. You design the solar differently and you design the roof garden differently, but both of them are not mutually exclusive. So that's one of many examples of that interface between energy and green infrastructure.
Thank you. So right now it's coming up on 9 o'clock, and I thank you everyone so much for coming and joining with us tonight. And I know there's a lot of still questions that are outstanding, and we will send a climate action email and we will get your questions answered. And I hope that we can continue learning from Midge Iorio and Walter Meyer, because they are such fantastic sources of knowledge in this. And we just really thank you for taking your time and joining us tonight. And I guess the only last thing I have to say is just that, you know, it's up to us to make these changes, and that our children's future, I mean, I'm a mother of two, and I just really feel like our children's future really depends on us acting now, and that we must do things differently, because if we continue down this road, we you know, you hear all the predictions and we're seeing what's going to happen. So I guess I just invite everyone to get involved and to make the changes, and we need to do it now. We've kicked the ball down the road too long. So it's all hands on deck, and we should all get to work. So thank you all so much for joining us.
It was a pleasure.